Good evening and welcome to Public Affairs Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. I'm Gene Preuss with C60, and joining me tonight is William Flores, who's a political history professor at the University of Houston downtown.
Political science.
Political science. That's right. It's not an art, it's a science. And then, of course, we've got my co-host Ray Valdez from C60 here with us tonight. And you guys look so great. I like the color of your jackets. It's that nice blue color. I'm wearing a purple color.
Is that what the color that is?
I think it's purple.
It's very nice.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
It is. And it kind of breaks up the blue.
Well, last month we took off. We had a repeat show last month, and so we're back in studio, and we want to talk about something that I think people will find interesting. And Bill, you've got a couple of new books out, and we've got them right here in front of us. And we're going to talk about this one first. Right. Excuse me, it's called The Texas Experiment, and it's a political science textbook. Now, let's talk about why you thought we needed a new political science textbook for Texas political science.
Well, first of all, I didn't seek to write a book about Texas politics or Texas government. I was preparing to teach a class on Texas government, and I was looking at all the different books. And right at that time, I had finished a book on democracy in the United States and the role of higher education in promoting civic engagement. One of the publishing houses contacted me, and it turned out that they were interested in one of their books. They were considering a new book on Texas politics, and they asked me to review the book that they already had. I was honest. I gave them praise as well as criticism, and they asked me, would you use the book? And I said, not really. And it's not anything against the book. It's that I think there's a lot of gaps in it. And so I held some focus groups with students that I was teaching U.S. politics, and I was preparing to teach the Texas politics course. So I asked students, if you've taken Texas politics and you've Texas government course, and you had to use a textbook, how did you like it? And I heard over and over again, well, it teaches about the structures, but there's just so much in there. It's hard to understand it. It doesn't really relate to our lives or our communities. And so, from that context, we got contacted by Sage, who was the book publisher that contacted us, and said, "Would you be willing to write a book on Texas government?" So I contacted you and others, the faculty at UHD, and one who had written or participated in a book on Texas government, Adolfo Santos, who had formerly been at UHD. And so we started to get together and talk about how we would write a book, what it should look like, what it should include, and what it should exclude. And that's how the book came into being.
Okay, I've read the introduction. I haven't quite got through the entire book yet, but that's sometimes, being a student, I was kind of late to finishing my college degree. A lot of the books that we had weren't directly on point to what the subject was that you signed up for. So it was, I'm hoping that when I get into the meat of this, that what you just said is true, that it's much more relevant.
Well,
just on that point, one of the things that we wanted to do was to talk about, to start every chapter with something that's happening in the lives of communities.
Well, I mean,
the
Texas is so
impact.
diverse.
And the other was to end every chapter with suggestions of what students could do, how they could get involved, how they could get engaged. And both of those are different than most of the other books.
Right. And, well, like me, I started, in politics quite early, back in my high school days during the Chicano movement. And I was fortunate to come under the wing of people like, Leonel Castillo and, Ben, what was his name? Ben
Reyes.
Reyes. And so, I got an education, but it was more like a street education than it was a formal education in politics. So when I took the Texas government class, it was very different than the way I understood it, from the way they viewed it and the way they passed their lessons on to me about, what you do, what you don't do, this is how things work, because, I mean, the way things really work, sometimes aren't in textbooks.
That's true. Absolutely. The reality is, when you're a president of a university, especially part of a system, you can't do things on your own. You need to do it as part of the system. But every president had to go before the legislature, before the government, the legislative board, the budget board. They had to present what their university was doing, what it was accomplishing, and their budgetary requests. In addition, you had to meet with each of the representatives in your district. So I got a good understanding of not just how our budgets worked, but there were a lot of local issues that I would go as an individual or as a member of a group and advocate for with local legislators. And so I had a chance to watch very closely, attend some of the committee meetings, in some cases participate in the hearings, and you get a sense of how it operates behind those closed doors.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's important to know how things actually work. Well, you know this. I mean, you were responsible for getting some kind of a set aside for the university, correct?
Yes.
And that takes a lot of, going to meetings and talking to representatives. And did you also have to go to the state senate and talk to them as well?
We did. The reality it is that, again, you have to get the authorization from the chancellor and the regents. You can't just, start lobbying for something because we're part of a system. But we had worked very closely with several of the local legislators for Harris County and for Houston, and Democrats and Republicans, and because we knew we would need more than just one person, even though they advocated for it. The same thing, by the way, we also got some funding in Congress, and we had to go lobby in Congress as well. But in all of these things, it is, you don't just go by yourself. Whenever possible, you take people from the community. You, in the UHD day, we would take students that would lobby for the interest of the system and talk specifically about our requests. And so at the time, Sylvester Turner was a representative. We had already several students who had served as interns, not only for Turner, but for other representatives. In fact, in the political science course, we have an internship class, and so we place them in local government and with representatives. That helped because they knew UHD. They knew the work that we were, and as the president, I had visited them. So they saw the work, they thought it was important, and as a result, we got several $100,000 in terms of special legislation.
I think I've met a couple of the interns that were from UHD. Wasn't Mario one, and what's his name, the other young man?
Well, our other co-host, Mario Salinas,
Right.
Was the first UHD graduate to intern with the city when he got that position a while back. And so, I mean, we've had some very good students who have come out. I mean, we've had a long history of very good students who've done very well and knew how to leverage themselves and their education and take it to new levels. But you know, that's that whole civic engagement thing that you were talking about earlier. And Bill, I wanted to get people a little bit of background. Now, you're on the show from time to time, and because you've got a very busy schedule, and so when you're in town, you know, we always ask you to be on the show, and when you can, you're here, and we appreciate that. But let's tell people a little bit about your background. So what makes you specifically, suited to talk about civic engagement? Ray was talking about the Chicano movement. That's kind of where he, got his political background and his activity in the city and learning how to put organizations together. But you were very involved in the Chicano movement in California when you were a young man, right?
Well, I actually grew up at a time during the Vietnam War. There were, I worked in an aircraft plant before I went to college, and there was an explosion. A lot of people were injured. I saw firsthand the power of collective action because the union turned off the machine and said, "We walk." And we walked out. We were out for 2 days, and they had, sat down and negotiated safety conditions. And I saw firsthand that it was more than, just doing a protest. It was deciding something collectively and taking action. I saw that with my parents, too, that they faced housing discrimination after World War II. My dad, with other vets, was active in the American GI Forum that, fought against some of that discrimination. My aunt, his sister, was actually, she was a journalist in East Los Angeles and had worked for a couple magazines and had her own monthly newsletter that she sent out about politics in East LA and about education politics. And so I got involved with her while I was an undergraduate student, and I wrote for her. Then the other was that through her, I met a lot of political activists. She was one of the co-founders of the Mexican American Political Association. Now, this was a woman who had been in a sanitarium for tuberculosis when she was 15, from the time that she was 15 to 26. And when she came out, she only had one lung. So she was on disability all of her life. And yet, every single day of her life, she was working for social justice. That had a huge impact on me because she'd always say, look, if I can do this with one lung and barely can breathe, there's no reason you can't. And so that left an impression on me. The other was that through her, because she'd have dinners at her house, very small, intimate dinners, she invited me. I met Bert Corona, who was a labor activist. I met Cesar Chavez at her home. And, I became involved in the United Farm Workers as a volunteer. Again, all of those things contributing and seeing the power of collective action and also encouraging kids and students in high school and college to go and participate in, when I was in high school, because my parents were fighting housing discrimination, there was a petition effort. It was a statewide initiative. In California, you can actually get things put on the Constitution through a statewide initiative. And so there was an anti-discrimination initiative. And to get on the ballot, we needed people to sign the petition. So when I was 16, I started when I was 15. We started talking about it, going to meetings, and then I saw them saying, we're going to fight this. We got our families to do it. Can you help? And not only did I go door to door, I got some of the high school students to join me in going door to door. And so, that sort of started my experience. And when I went to UCLA, I already had that mindset of I want to be involved. When I graduated from UCLA, by the way, I also was, as an undergraduate, worked as a consultant for Teleco and worked on a book that was a feasibility study for community empowerment in Los Angeles. And I continued it in graduate school, and we got it published. But the point is, as soon as I got my master's, one of the first things I did was start working to address an issue that we still have today with refugees and immigrants. Of course, the response was different. We welcomed the Catholic Church that I was involved in, and the diocese took them in, looked for homes and for shelters and for food, and I participated in that. And I formed an immigration rights organization to help. I was a co-founder of it, to help not only get them their papers, but also to find work, to create a network of support. And we formed a national coalition, which eventually got Simpson-Rodino passed and Simpson-Mazzoli, which gave amnesty to a lot of people. That was a national coalition. So civic engagement is something that's very much in my family roots. I learned from it from watching others. I saw its impact, and I believe very strongly in it.
Yeah, that's a powerful motivator, having family,
Exactly.
especially they're involved and they can show you the way, and
Right.
they're there to answer the questions for you, hopefully get you out of trouble sometimes, things of that sort. But yeah,
No comment.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate also because I've met some lifelong friends during the movement, and we're still together and we're still out there working on different projects, and it's a commitment. It's a lifelong commitment. Being engaged. I moved away for a little while when I was in the military, and came back, and after I settled back in Houston, got re-engaged and connected with my friends, and they were still all doing the same thing, working on different issues that already. I never saw the value of going to school. I was brought up in an environment where, if you get through high school, you're a lucky guy, go get a job, that kind of thing. We want you out of the house by the time you're 18.
Same thing.
Right, so,
Well, it reminds me, Jose Angel Gutierrez, who was one of the founders of Mexican-American Youth Organization, Mayo. Mm-hmm. He's from this area, and he went to school at U of H, went to law school there, and is from South Texas, and he was telling me, that was one of the things he wanted to learn, is not only who has the power, but how does that power work? How does it flow? And it's not about necessarily running things or being in charge, but understanding those conduits and how they run, kind of like electricity, and understanding, how to talk to people, how to negotiate. And I think that a lot of young people today, I mean, we see it in our college students, they're very interested in learning about, they want to be leaders, right? And, I think one of the things you said, when we had at UHD for a little while, a leadership seminar. And one of the things Bill always said was that, there's a difference between leadership and management. And that management means that you're kind of overseeing things and, supervising. Whereas leadership means adopting a vision.
Exactly.
And adopting and helping people move, helping people share that vision, and then move in the direction of making that vision a reality. And I think that young people, in our college classes, we still see that desire, and it's not really taught to them. And so I think a book like this, and as you were saying, a lot of textbooks, this has been a complaint that academics and people have had about textbooks for a long time, is that and the way they're written, they're very kind of cut and dried. They're kind of talking very about nobody in particular, and it's hard to connect with that. The type of students we have in our colleges and universities today have changed from what they were 40, 50, even when I was going to school, which was getting close to 40 years ago. But and they want something different, and you've got to grab their attention, you've got to hold it, and you've got to engage them. And so you're talking about civic engagement, not only how do we make a difference, how do we contribute to the greater good of the community, but also how do we as academics engage students in a book. So what was your vision of how you wanted this book to proceed? How was it going to be different?
Well, one of the first things is that I wanted the students, and this is a collaborative. So, my second author, of course, you wrote the history chapter.
Yeah, that's the best
but,
chapter.
Christina Hughes, we sat down and we were talking about we want students to be able to be engaged. So we were already in our Texas government courses having them look at what district they live in, who represents them. And like in my Texas politics, which is upper division course, I have them, as a requirement in the first couple of weeks, they have to schedule a meeting and go meet with at least one of their representatives. But they first have to have a sense of who represents, where is their district. They have to see it on the map and describe it. And in here, in this book, we talk about if you wanted to become active in a party, which party would it be? For them to figure that out. But also, how do you go about becoming active? Let's say you wanted to get involved in the precinct level. What would you do? If you wanted to become a precinct chair, how would you go about it? So we talk about that in the book to encourage them, not just to like one of the things that it actually says that, that it states in here is, sure, write something on social media, but that's not enough. Writing a letter to the editor is great, but that's not enough. You've got to make change, and that means working with other people to make that change happen. It's not just, it is about elections. Elections have big consequences. It's not just about elections, because decisions take place on your local community that affect you, whether or not the trash gets collected or the recycle. If you drove by my house right now, there's a can in front of it that hasn't been picked up, right? That happens all the time. Potholes. Which everybody complains about, right, and gets fixed for 3 days, and then as soon as the rain comes, they're messed up again.
Potholes get potholes.
Right. And so, we decided, well, let's give them some of those exercises so they understand. Now, because the way that we wrote the book, we wanted them to think about these as political issues. How do you get that resolved?
When we started our LULAC council there at UHD, I took the position that we start with your student government. Mm-hmm. Look at how they're set up and how they're run. Keep an eye on the money. Do they really control their money, or is it the administration that controls the money? Sure. Okay, because when you talk about power, who really has the power? Let's try to identify, where it sits. And so LULAC, while it was for the kids, right? Really, for me, it was their first touch into politics, because once you're there with the other representatives from the other groups, the other student groups, right? You're vying for position in terms of who makes the decisions and which direction you go and things of that sort. So I always found that to be a very useful tool for me, when I'm organizing these college councils.
That is a very effective. One of the things that Christina does, in fact, she's working on a companion with another faculty member with exercises they can do based on, as we've been using the book, what we've learned. But she has her class draft a constitution for Texas. What laws would you change? What laws would you get rid of? What new laws would you write?
Yeah. How many different entries are there in the Constitution currently?
Texas is the second longest constitution in the country.
So many things to play with.
Yeah.
Well, the Texas Constitution, we just keep adding layers to it, right? They just, and it used to be, back when I was a kid in the 70s, it's if Houston wanted to do something, right, we want to pave those roads, you had to put it in the Constitution. You had to get a constitutional amendment to do it. Now, how do you think somebody in Lubbock is going to vote on whether or not Houston spends their money? I don't know why they did it. I think it was to control, right? It was to slow down things from happening, so change doesn't happen because you've got to get everybody on board to do it. Now, we've gone away from that model, but that's one of the reasons why that Constitution has 400 amendments to it?
Yeah, something like that. I can't tell you offhand.
It's amazing.
But the point, I think, is that you want students not just to read the book, not just to take a test and check it off and say, okay, I passed that one, but rather to be active and engaged citizens.
Right.
To hopefully learning so they can make a difference here in the state of Texas, because they are the future. They're the ones that 20 years from now, they're going to be running government. Some of them, students that we had a few years ago, are now running for office, and some of them have been elected. So, I don't take credit for that. That's something they decided to do. But if we can help them and give them the tools so that whatever they do in life, that they're going to understand and be active in government. Too few people do.
Right.
But one thing is, as you point out, is that running for office isn't the only way to be a leader. And I think we use that term leader as to say, well, political officials. When I was growing up, if somebody in my family had a problem, write a letter to, I don't want to bother our leaders, right? I don't want to do it. But it's not realized, and I think we've changed that a lot because we have a lot more people in the Hispanic community who are in those elected positions, that they're not elevated above us, they represent us. And I think that we've changed how we see elected officials, that they are representative of us, that they are answerable to us, and that they need to address our problems, even if they're not in the same party. And I think that's an interesting thing, because a lot of people seem to think, oh, well, if you are this ethnic group or that ethnic group, you're going to vote for this party. And that is certainly not the case among Hispanics. 30% vote Republican, and another 60% vote Democrat. But then you also have independent voters in there as well.
Well, and that's one of the things in the last chapter of the book, we talk about the future of Texas. And we make the argument that demography is not destiny. Just because, the Latinos have become, they are the largest single ethnic group ever since 2022 in the state of Texas. That doesn't mean that as the percentage grows, it's all going to become Democrat. The reality is there's different experiences. Some come from Latin America, some were born here, some for several generations. So you have people that have had different experiences. Some are Catholic, some are Protestant, some are have their own businesses. We cannot assume because of your last name or the ethnicity or race that you are, that you're always going to think the same or vote the same. Right. And unfortunately, too many politicians make that assumption.
I mean, we have a current issue where they're redrawing the maps of Texas, and they're doing it in an off year, right? They're not following the rules that they had in the past, where every 10 years you redraw the maps. But we have this mandate coming down from the federal government saying, we need to get more districts where Republicans can win.
Well, President Trump has told Governor Abbott, who was actually reluctant to do it initially, give me 5 more districts that are Republican. It wasn't just redistrict, give me 5 Republican districts, and do it by covering up some of the Democratic seats.
Yeah.
So, this is it is
But
unusual.
now we're focusing
but
on the demographics.
It's
right?
already gone before the House and the Senate, and it's been adopted. You know, I think that what you have is a situation where there are going to be districts that are affected, that communities that had historically that had a representative that looked like them are not going to anymore, and it's also an unfortunate thing because it's causing a backlash, and now Governor Newsom in California is doing the same thing. You've got Florida considering it. You've got Missouri considering it, possibly Michigan. There's several states now all getting on the bandwagon, whether Republican or Democrat. And the end result is it undermines rather than encourages representation, because people feel that those districts are so large, they no longer are going to listen to my needs and the needs of my community, and so why should I vote?
Right, and you know we're really focused on what's going on with this redistricting. That I've kind of lost track of how many trillions of dollars we've run up our debt. You know?
$7 trillion in 7 months.
That's right. And so we were supposed to be saving money. We were going to cut back. We're going to get rid of all these people, all these departments. We're going to save money for the government. We're going to trim it up, and that's not what's happening.
Well,
so it's
I'm less concerned about the debt, although that is a huge concern. But you know, unfortunately, we've seen these massive cuts, and sometimes for political reasons or retaliation or ideological, like going after diversity and issues and banning them from the textbooks and things like that. I think that's unfortunate. We're seeing in sort of a double standard going on, like where certain things are criticized as woke, and yet other things that, like Confederate statues, are being brought back. Some of the institutions that had previously had Confederate names are being renamed again with those Confederate names.
Well, I'm really kind of, because of personal reasons, a little upset about the Cavazos base name change again, because I knew the Cavazos family. Right. I want to remind everybody that you're watching Public Affairs Public Access on Houston Media Source TV with Gene Preuss, Ray Valdez, and Bill Flores. And we're looking at issues facing the Hispanic community, not only here in Houston and in Texas, but all issues that relate to the Hispanic community. And that's what our focus is, because, you know, as the old saying, right? Rising water raises all ships. So you affect one group, and other groups are going to be affected as well. I mean, that's why we think these issues are important. Bill, I want to talk about the other book, and this Texas Experiment is in the 2nd edition, right? So and which is I want to say pretty cool, because it was just last year that we had the 1st edition, and then they wanted us to do a 2nd edition, probably because of all the errors I made. But
politics changes.
Right, it changes so fast. But you have a new book out that you've been working on another course that you teach. And actually, at UH downtown, we have a degree in nonprofit management, and I think a certificate too as well, right?
Yes.
And so you wrote a book on nonprofit management, and of course, we're all involved in nonprofits in many forms. So you want to talk about this book a little bit? What's the title?
It's called Nonprofit Management: Moving Your Nonprofit from Where It Is to Where You Want It to Be. And I'll tell you, just like that, you know, we did not start out to write a book. In matter of fact, several of us were engaged in a panel during when Houston Points of Light, the National Points of Light Conference took place in Houston. And this is now 11 years ago. And, you know, my wife, Noelle, was at Flores. A few of us had a panel with presidents, and also we had another panel with nonprofit leaders. And after the panel, we were sitting talking, and several of them were saying, you know, the issues that were raised, it needs to be in a book. And, you know, Noel said, are you listening to that, Bill? And actually what happened is that that helped to start the momentum to form the Masters of Nonprofit Management. But in the course of it, because that in itself is important, because traditionally when you develop a new degree, too often it's just a group of faculty get together and say, we need this master's, we're going to write up the classes, and we'll submit it. The approach when I was president, I suggested that we take a different approach. Let's meet with industry. Let's find out what their needs are, and let's work with them to make sure that the curriculum meet those needs. And then where we can, let's hire from industry to help teach with us. Well, that wasn't necessarily something that all the faculty liked, but over time they realized that helped them to get the degrees passed. And so that worked with the MBA, the Masters of Business Administration, and it worked with a Masters of Nonprofit Management. We got people together to talk about what should be, if someone's getting a master's, what are the competencies they should have? What should they be able to do when they graduate? And we listed all those things that they should do, and then what courses will teach those things, and who should be teaching. And so that's how we designed that master's. And in the process, that's helped define the book that we were going to write.
So is there a undergrad course?
There is an undergraduate course on
Okay.
Introduction to Nonprofits.
Okay.
And actually, I worked on a special, what was called a public leadership program for people that were already, didn't have a degree, but were working in the city of Houston or in Harris County, that, you know, they were in public administration. How could we help them to get a college degree? So we put on, based on the experience that they had and the courses that I already taken, we built an online program so they could get their undergraduate degree and moved right into
Right.
the Masters of Nonprofit Management.
You know, when I first came back to Houston and got involved with LULAC and helping them with their with rebuilding their LULAC clubhouse, we formed a nonprofit. I didn't know anything about running a nonprofit. I'd worked at the city of Houston, you know, in the mayor's office, and you know that's local government and you know some politics, but had no basis whatsoever on how to run a nonprofit, right? But I noticed that there were so many organizations that were going belly up that, you know, I didn't understand what was causing them to fail. So, you know, for me, the first course of action was to go buy a book. And I mean, I was surprised how many books there were.
Absolutely.
But there weren't any books that covered, you know, here's where you get started, here's how you progress, here's where you want to wind up, and here's where you need to make adjustments.
Right.
Now, I haven't read your book. I'm looking forward to reading that book. So what approach are you taking in terms of?
Well, first of all, getting back to the point about a lot of nonprofits don't make it, it's interesting because over a 10-year period, about 20% of nonprofits fail. But compare that to small businesses. Over a 3-year period, 50% of businesses fail. So nonprofits actually have a longer opportunity to test the ground. Part of it is because they're nonprofit. That doesn't mean that they don't need to make money, but 50% of nonprofits in America, there are 1.8 million nonprofits, not all 501c3s, but there's different, you know, kinds of organizations. But of those 1.8 million, 50% have total revenues last year of less than $50,000. So then if you take 70% of nonprofits in America have less than 10 employees. And again, 50% have one or no employees.
Now, is it because of the IRS rules that if you don't bring in more than $50,000 in revenue, you don't have to do the long tax form? You can do
the 990.
you do the 990 postcard?
Yeah, but part of it has to do with more than that. And that's because nonprofits start with an idea, and often by an individual or maybe a family member. And they'll invite their family and friends to participate. They say, you know, there's a need here in our community. We've got children and they need to get buses to school, and the schools can't afford it. Let's get a van and start getting them to school. And then they do it as volunteers, and then bit by bit they say, you know, we should try to do this citywide. Let's build an organization. And again, you've got volunteers doing it. And so bit by bit, they build the organization. And when they do, if you're going to get recognized as a nonprofit, then you have to get chartered in the state of Texas, and you have to get an IRS letter. Many nonprofits haven't yet gone to that phase. And those that have, you know, I'm on the board of an organization that's been around for 10 years, and it has $500,000 in budget, and it has 3 staff, but none of them are full-time. That's not uncommon. It takes a long time and a lot of revenue before you can actually, I mean, look at C60.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
that's who I thought you were talking about.
Yeah. C60, you know, Ray, you and Gene and others have been doing this as volunteers, you know, for over 10 years. And, you know, you've been carrying this on your back. That's so common, right? And finally, the organization was able to hire 1 staff person, and now considering hiring an executive director. And that's phenomenal. And that's very common with nonprofits. Right. So we wrote this book to help people go from where they are to where they want to be, and to chart the path step by step to get there.
Right.
One of the things that I think is interesting is a lot of times when you talk to either Bill or David Branham, who also...
He's got a chapter in here as well.
Who's also prominent in there, and I ran the program for a while. You and him switched off running the program. But David, he always says, and I think you've said the same thing, what's the first thing you tell people when they're thinking about starting a nonprofit? He says, don't. Don't start one. Look for one that's already doing what you're doing. Now, like C60, no one else was doing that. But why do you say that? Why do you discourage people?
You know, well, first of all, everybody looks at and they say, well, there's so many foundations on there. Yes, but the reality of it is that foundations want to start something new, usually a project. They don't tend to give you operating funds. They tend to give you something to get the program up and running, to pay for supplies you might need, say cameras or the rent or something like that. But for 2 or 3 years, maybe 5. But after that, you're on your own.
Yeah, raising money ain't easy. I mean, it's not, right? And I mean, we found that out in C60. Well, raising funds is a lot of work, and it's not everybody's just willing to open up their wallets, and a lot of times it's small change if they are, and very thankful for that. But whenever you need a big capital campaign, it's a lot of work.
Well, and also right now, because of the cuts on the federal level, that has also cut money to nonprofits, especially in areas that Trump doesn't like, those that deal with immigrants and refugees, or those that are dealing with issues that are, you know, let's say, for example, providing reproductive rights to women, or you know, dealing with educational equity issues and diversity. They're gone in terms of federal funding. Doesn't mean they're gone in terms of other funding, but that's millions and millions of dollars. I would
Right.
just take PBS to cut the funding. In Houston, that's $14 million that they're no longer going to have. And so they're starting a resilience fund. But it takes a long time to raise $14 million.
Well, and it's hard because
And that's each year. So, you're talking about trying to fill that gap every single year.
all the organizations that I sat on the boards of were all competing for the same unrestricted dollars.
That's right.
Because we need to be able to cover salaries, and things that aren't covered, under some of these other grants because they're restricted to doing one particular thing.
And one of the things, the thing too, we talk about it, the first couple chapters deals with the history of nonprofits in America, and many of them came out of social movements, including the struggle against slavery, including the struggle to win the 19th Amendment so women could vote. That's how the League of Women Voters was formed, because after they got the 19th Amendment passed, they recognized, well, we still have to do education of voters. And so the League of Women Voters was formed out of that movement. Earth Day, hundreds of organizations formed, and legislation was passed as a result of Earth Day. So we have forgotten often where the roots were.
Right.
Just like, LULAC has done so much in the struggle against segregation, going all the way back to the 1930s, 1950s, and voting rights. So, C60 now is a nonprofit continuing that work, and not just rehabbing the building, and it's going to be beautiful once it's finished, but also continuing those programs and making sure that there's a place in Houston that honors that past and continues it.
Right. Well, we saw that there was a vacuum in raising money for Latino organizations. There was nobody working that space. And the other thing was just to provide guidance to people that are out there trying to form these nonprofits. Because mentorship, is very important, as these are the things that can go wrong quickly, right? And so to be able to avoid those pitfalls, it's nice to hook up with someone that's gone through the process.
Well, that's a very important thing, because one of the things I think a lot of people get in trouble with is because of fundraising, or what are you doing with the accounting and with the money, right? And it's not just, that's a big thing, because if you start raising money and you're not using it properly, you can get into a lot of trouble.
And by the way, that happened in an organization that had been around for a few years. I was on the board for 6 months, and I withdrew because I said, guys, you don't have an audit, you don't have somebody that's a CPA reviewing your books, and quite honestly, I see that you're using federal dollars for state activities and state dollars for city activities, and you can't just change the color of money. You're going to get in trouble. Well, that's what happened, and it got disbanded.
Right. And that's the thing, is I always worry with these organizations that are hesitant to open their books. If someone says, well, no, you're going to have to wait because we have to do this and that, and we'll get it to you, and it never comes, then you know that there's some kind of structural issue there.
Well, and these were not dishonest people. They were doing the right thing, but the wrong way. They just didn't know the right way.
There's a little lack of sophistication there, because they think they know, the best way to do something, but until you get a reference book.
Exactly, and a good board. That's one of the things that we talk about here. Is the board of directors is your governance body. They have responsibility, fiduciary responsibility, to make sure the executive director is doing the right things, that the budget director is doing the right things, and that the strategy, that the nonprofit is keeping to its vision and mission. Too often, and we had a nonprofit here in Houston that had $10 million in budget, and things changed quickly. Overnight, within, well, not overnight, in less than 6 months, they had to shut their doors. Because what seemed like a lot of money, once some of the other budgets were cut, they had bought a facility, they couldn't pay for it.
Right.
And so it's not just that you've got to have money, you have to have the skills and the professional staff to make sure you're using that money the right way.
And this is something that I pointed out to the person that does our development work, is that we need to mentor. We need to have more people coming into that space
Right.
that know how to do it and know how to do it well, because these are, it's relationship building. You need to know who the people are there that are running these foundations, what their giving strategies are, what the accountability for those programs are, and how you report to them.
Exactly.
There's a lot to know. I mean,
Well, and grant writing is an art too, right?
Is it an art or a science?
It's both, because it's really an art in terms of knowing and understanding what the foundation or the granting agency, what they want, and you have to really read the RFP carefully. And so it's also a science, because you've got to be able not just tell them what they want to hear, but have a clear sense of you as an organization, your mission and vision. How does this help you to carry that out? Too often, and the organization that I gave an example of that was involved in refugee and immigrant work, they were too dispersed. They went after too many different grants, and they lost their focus. And that's one of the things we talk about in that book. You've got to keep your focus. So it's not just about grant writing. You're not chasing grants. You're finding the right grants for your mission and vision. And then you find ways of sustaining that work.
Right.
And so we also talk about a business plan. How do you develop a business plan to make that organization sustainable and that you'll grow and thrive?
Well, I know that when you did the workshop for us, it was like herding cats. We had to, we were looking at our mission statement and our vision statement, and Gene and I had talked early on about we wanted to do a specific type of programming, but other board members, they wanted to go in a different direction. Bringing all those ideas together to move us, forward. That was real work.
It is, absolutely. But it's important work.
So I noticed in this book, The Nonprofit Management, it's William Flores, Faja Koja, wonderful person. Where's she at now?
She's in Washington. She's dean of a business college and the state college there. But then, Faiza was at UHD, Noel was at UHD,
right.
And then David Branham and Hanjin Mao are at UHD.
The nonprofit there.
I like to work with colleagues that are close by, that we can work together on it. Same thing with the Texas experiment.
Yeah. The Texas, and it was, I've got the first chapter in here, and then you wrote about half the book, and now we had a couple of other people on the first edition, but now it's Christina and Anita wrote a lot of the other book. But I know you did a lot of work on this.
Absolutely. Every single chapter I had to edit, and Tina, Christina Hughes, she took 4 to 5 chapters that she drafted and revised, but the book would not have been done had it not been done with everybody involved, because they all brought ideas.
Well, I'm curious, did you have a focus group after you released the book and put it into the classroom?
Actually, the publisher, Sage, does that.
Okay.
And they get that information so that improves the second edition or any future editions.
All right.
Gentlemen, we're almost out of time, and I want to say that, I think if anybody's watching the show, they're going to get a lot out of this and find out that, there is a lot to learn, both if you're talking about how government works, how the state of Texas works, or if you're talking about how nonprofits within the state of Texas and nationwide work. And I think that, we benefit, you and I, Ray, benefit because we have Bill on speed dial, and we can call him up anytime, right? And vice versa. And so I want to thank you guys. Ray, do you want to have the last word?
No, I want Bill to have the last word.
Just that I enjoy working so much with you guys, and you know, thank you so much, Gene, for inviting us. But I really value the faculty and staff at the University of Houston downtown, and working together. It's made us a better university, but more importantly, more engaged, more committed to working to make this a better state and a better city.
Yeah, go Gators. I'm always amazed how many fantastic people have graduated.
At the Gator Chomp, all right? So thank you very much. I want to thank you all for watching and for joining us in this discussion. And we're here at Houston Media Source TV and this wonderful, another great nonprofit. Thank you very much for joining us for Public Affairs Public Access, looking at issues facing the Hispanic community here in Houston, Texas. For Ray Valdez, for William Flores, I'm Gene Preuss with C60. Thank you all. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon.